Hello, good day, everyone. This is a series, a recorded series based on the doctrine of the Trinity. I hope that you find this recording, all of these recording, encouraging and beneficial. As I hope, and my prayer is, that I hope that it may equip you to defend this important doctrine of the faith, the Trinity, because it's at the heart of the identity of who God is. So, um, so this is going to be our series for the doctrine of the Trinity, and so I hope that it's encouraging and that it will equip you. Um, it'll provide you tools as you defend the doctrine, and so this is going to be our outline for this whole series right here. And so I'm gonna do a recorded video for each session. And so for this session right now, we're going to be talking about monotheism and the word Elohim. So, I hope you find this very, very interesting and very helpful as well. So before we get started, I just want to first talk about reading and studying the Bible in context because this is very, very crucial when it comes to studying and defending the Trinity. Right. So, any doctrine in particular. So, context is king. Right. So, say the first one, yeah, context is king. But what's also important to understand is that there are many contexts. So it's plural right there. I added the letter S in the word context. It's quite deliberate. So there is scriptural context, which is the one you're probably more familiar, which is if you read a verse, usually you have to read the ones before that verse and the ones after it. So yeah, scriptural context is important, but we also have to be aware of the other context, such as historical context, cultural context, and worldview context, especially worldview. I cannot stress that enough. Worldview context, the way biblical writers thought about the world and their particular mindset, how they saw and view things, right? Because remember, the biblical writers were not modern like us; they were ancient, and so they had a completely different worldview, a completely different mindset compared to us. Because us people, we live in a 21st century, modern, post-enlightenment, rational, and scientific way of thinking. We tend to think think about things in a very rational and scientific way, right? And yeah, we are post enlightenment as well. But biblical writers were not like us, right? So worldview context is a big deal. And yeah, so that's the first one, context. So scriptural, historical, cultural, and worldview. The biblical writers were ancient; they were not modern like us. And secondly, this is also a crucial one. While the Bible is written for us, it's also important to know that the Bible was not written to us. Again, it goes back to the context. Um, because um, biblical writers were writing the biblical text not to us, but to a completely different audience. A different audience who had a completely different way of thinking, mindset, culture, and again, worldview. So it was actually Professor John Walton who who famously said this, and other ancient Near Eastern scholars will make the same point as well. While the Bible is written for us, yeah, it's for our own understanding, it's for our own application, it's for our own, benefit. But it's also important to know that the Bible was not written to us. It was written to a completely different audience or a completely different worldview. So if we're going to read the biblical text, we have to keep this in mind, right? Number three, never read a Bible verse. Right? Never read a Bible verse because you can just take one Bible verse and interpret however you want it. Interpret however you want it, to interpret, right? So And yeah, this is where scriptural context comes in. This is why scriptural context is important to never read a Bible verse. Right? So you have to read the ones before it and ones after it as well to understand the wider context. And lastly, read the Bible as a whole together. And so we're going to be doing this a lot in the series when it comes to the doctrine of the Trinity, because we're going to read a lot from the Old Testament, but we're also going to read stuff in the New Testament because both the Old and the New Testament, they all line up together. So they cohere and they must be consistent. So, so I want to establish this first before we get into the doctrine of the Trinity. So we have to read every passage in context and consider the other context, such as the historical, cultural, and worldview context. And to understand that while the Bible is written for us, it was not written to us. It was written to a completely different audience. So it's important that we have this in mind. And so, what's the payoff for studying the Trinity? So, what's the outcome? Why do we have to study it, right? Well, number one, personally, it's part of it's part of getting to know God. As Christians, it's important to know Him, right? And for me personally, as you grow in your knowledge of God, your relationship and your intimacy with God will go deeper as well. So, so it's it benefits us in a personal level as well, and in our spiritual life and in our walk with Christ. So, yeah, it's to get to know God as well, getting to know more and more about Him. Right. 2 Peter 3:18 says, Peter tells us to grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So it's to get to know God. But more importantly, I think this is the one that you're um, probably this is the main reason why we need to study the Trinity, is that it is important for apologetical and theological discussions and evangelism with Unitarians, particularly with Jews, Muslims, Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, etc. Right? So any Unitarian view that denies the deity of Christ and the deity of the Holy Spirit, um, it's important because these are crucial doctrines that need to be defended, and which then becomes, you know, uh, a tool for evangelism, right? So this is important. It's important why we need to study the Trinity because of these um, so for these reasons as well, right? So Jews, Muslims, Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, they deny the doctrine of the Trinity, and so that's why it's important that we know the Trinity so that we can defend it, share to them how it's true and why it's true, and then once they're convinced, becomes a tool of evangelism for them as well. All right, so let's begin with the first session. So the Trinity, monotheism, and Elohim. Um, so let's begin. So I want to first talk about the monotheism test, right? Monotheism test. Now, the common names for God, one of them is Elohim, the other is El, the third is Yahweh, YHWH, and in your English translation, if you have the capital L, capital O, capital R, and capital D written, it's not really Lord that's written, but in the ancient original text in the Hebrew, it's the divine name, it's Yahweh. And in some cases, you have Eloah, singular, right? But what's more familiar, what's more common is Elohim, which is used about approximately 2,500 times all over the Hebrew Bible. 2,000 to 2,500. So it's the most common name for God. And so this is the one that I want to focus on mainly. So while Elohim is a common name for God, right? There are other instances where it's used to describe not just the God of the Bible. So yes, the word Elohim is used to describe the God of the Bible, right? But there are other cases as well. That is used. The word Elohim is used except for the God of the Bible. One of them is the gods of the nations. So the word Elohim is used for the gods of the nations. So if we just go um, into Judges 11:24, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. Let's go to tab. I'm just gonna show you my logos right now. All right, it's here, right here. So we just wait for it. All right, so here we go. Let's go to Judges 11:24. Just, um, let's just quit this for a moment. So here we go. Judges 11:24. Will you not possess what Chemosh, your God, the word God there is Elohim, give you to possess, and all that Yahweh your God has dispossessed before us? So will you not possess what Chemosh? Chemosh is the god of the Moabites, right? Chemosh. And Chemosh is described as an Elohim. Right here, it's the same word, Elohim. Right now, that is very, very interesting. All right, so let's go to another one. First Kings 11, verse 33. Because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites. So the gods of the nations. And Milcom is Elohim. The god there is Elohim. Ashtoreth, all right, goddess, it's also Elohim. So Ashtoreth is an Elohim, the goddess, usually used for feminine, but the word Elohim is used. For Chemosh, again, it's Elohim. For Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, it's also Elohim. All right. So now that is interesting. So let's go back to the slides. So, all right. So again, we've looked at the word Elohim. It's used for the God of the Bible, but it's also used for the gods of the nations. Ashtoreth, Milcom, right, and Chemosh are all called Elohim. They're also called Elohim. It's the same word that is used to describe the God of the Bible. Right? Demons are also called Elohim. All right, so let's go to, I want to show you that in Deuteronomy 32:17. So if I can show you my slides again. Oh, sorry, the Bible software again. So let's go to Deuteronomy 32:17. Deuteronomy 32:17. If you look at it right here, they sacrificed to demons, that's the word shadim, that were no gods, to gods they had never known. Now, by the way, before I continue elaborating here, we're using the English Standard Version. If you actually look at the NLT, right, because the English Standard Version actually obscures this passage, right? I think it's an incorrect translation when they say that the demons that were no gods, because if you look at the word gods right here, it's Eloah. But the NLT actually does a pretty good job of translating this. In the NLT, it'll say they sacrifice to demons that are not God. It's singular. It's no kidding. But to gods they had never known. All right, so we're using the English Standard Version, which obscures this. But in the NLT, they actually did a pretty good job of translating this. All right. But besides that, it says here they sacrificed to demons, shadim, that were no gods, to gods. And the word gods there is Elohim. They had never known. To new gods that had come recently, right? So again, the word gods here is Eloah. So there's a distinction. And then the other one here, the gods, the demons, they're called Elohim. So Demons are also called Elohim. It's the same word that is used for demons. So that's just one of them right now. Right, demons. Shadim, Deuteronomy 32:17. The demons are also called Elohim. Members of God's divine council. Now, this is going to be a crucial um, passage as well. All right, so let's take a look at Psalm 82. Let's take a look at Psalm 82. All right, Psalm 82. Let it just load. All right, here we go. All right, so Psalm 82. So Psalm 82, verse 1. God has taken his place in the divine council. All right, so you have God here, capital G-O-D, Elohim, right? Now it becomes a bit confusing in the second part of verse 1. It says here, in the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And if you click on the word gods, it's Elohim. Now fast forward to verse 6 of Psalm 82. It tells you who are these gods are. It tells you who the gods are. Verse 6, it says, I said you are gods. Elohim, again. And these gods here that are in the divine council, they're said to be sons of the Most High. Right? Sons of the Most High. All right. So the sons of God, well, because the Most High is God. So these gods here are called sons of God. Now, I can't get into divine council theology right now, but basically, the sons of God here, because there is a view, well, actually, the most common view of Psalm 82 is that the gods here are just mere people. But if you go over to Psalm 89, verse 5 to 7, you have the same divine council terminology there. The sons of God are said to be in the skies. And so you take that back to Psalm 82, you don't have any humans or judges or Israelite leaders ruling in the skies. All right. So the gods in the divine council, whom God is in the midst of, all right, these gods are said to be sons of the Most High. In other words, they are the sons of God. And they are in the skies, according to Psalm 89. We won't get there. So, um, so God's divine council are also called Elohim, right? Members of God's divine council, which are the sons of the Most High, the sons of God. Right? They are also called Elohim. All right. Let's go more. The deceased Samuel. Right? The deceased Samuel in 1 Samuel 28:13. I think this is a familiar story. This is the story where Samuel had just died, and Saul wants to see him, right? So let's go to 1 Samuel 28:13. Actually, let's read down the previous verses so that we're familiar with the story. Oops. Here we go. 1 Samuel 28. Let's read down the previous verses. Remember, Saul goes up to the he wants to meet the witch at Endor because where he is, there's no more necromancers and there's no more witches there, and so he goes up to Endor and finds a witch because he wants to speak to Samuel. Right? He wants to speak to Samuel. All right, here we go. Let's read from. All right, so he goes up to the witch, and then let's read from verse 10. But Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, this is the witch now. The woman said to Saul, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. All right, this freaks her out. And the woman said to Saul, Why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman, the witch, catch this. The woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. If you click on the word God, it's the word Elohim, right? Now, if you actually look at the next verse, Saul knows that it was actually Samuel that he saw. Look, he said to her, what's his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up and he is wrapped in a robe. And then Saul knew that it was Samuel. So the deceased Samuel, the disembodied dead, right? Samuel, the spirit of dead Samuel is called an Elohim, right? It's called an Elohim, right? It's called an Elohim. So let's go back to the slides right here. So the God of the Bible, the gods of the nations, demons, the members of God's divine council, the disembodied dead, the deceased Samuel, are all called Elohim. Are all called Elohim. Now, the angel of Yahweh. I won't get into this because it depends on the translation that you have with this. But angels and the angel of Yahweh are said to be called Elohim as well. Because again, I won't talk about it here as much because the angel of Yahweh, spoiler alert, um, it's the second person of the Trinity. Well, you can call him God himself. You can say that. Well, if God can come down in the form of a man as an angel, well, the angel is Elohim. The angel is God himself. And so with that in mind, angels in general can be called Elohim. So I won't get into that because I think that'll be too long. But I think I think we've um, covered all of the instances where you have these beings that are called Elohim, with the exception of the God of the Bible. Because remember, the God of the Bible is Elohim, all right? The gods of nations are Elohim. Demons, the Shadim, are also called Elohim. The members of God's divine council, the sons of God, the sons of the Most High, are called Elohim. The sea Samuel is also called an Elohim, right? All right, so now that we've mentioned that, the questions that I want to ask you is this. Are there more than one Elohim that exists or is real? All right, take a look at the list. Are there more than one Elohim? Well, because we've just covered it, it's kind of obvious there is. I would say yes, there is. Now, here's the next question that I want to ask you. Because there is more than one Elohim that exists or that's real, would you consider yourself a monotheist? Are you then a monotheist? Now, this is the part where you're probably thinking, you know, sort of like an eye opener, right? Now, this is the part where you have to be aware of context, worldview context, because this is a good example of taking something out of context, especially the word Elohim, right? Because we've affirmed that there are many Elohim, right? Many people will say, oh, that is polytheism. But what we'll see is that that is not the case, right? That's not the case. And so I think what I would say is that I think we may need to rethink of what we actually mean by monotheism. What a biblical writer actually means by monotheism. All right. Because remember, again, the Bible was written for us, but it was not written to us. All right. So what we find odd, what we find weird to us modern people may have been completely normal for the ancient biblical writer. And to give you an example of that is exactly right here, the word Elohim. Right, it's the word Elohim. So, so there are many Elohim, right? So the Hebrew text is very clear. We've just taken a look at that. But why does this bother many people? Even Orthodox Christians, even the most evangelical or Reformed Christians. This bothers some. This bothers them. This bothers many people. Now, I think the reason why this bothers a lot of people is because when you see the letters G, O, and D, like whenever you just see it or whenever you think about it, we typically assign or we assume that that word refers to a specific set of unique attributes. Attributes such as eternal or omnipotence or omnipresence, sovereignty, creatorship, right? All those attributes are sort of packed into the letters G, O, and D. And that's why it creeps many people out when you put the letter S at the end of the word God. But the biblical writer never used the word Elohim in that way. They weren't thinking of a specific set of attributes because if they were, right, creatorship, sovereignty, all those attributes, if they were thinking of attributes, then all of those other Elohim have those attributes. Like, for example, the spirit of dead Samuel. No Israelite, no biblical writer is going to think that the spirit of dead Samuel is in the same ontological level as the God of Israel. No Israelite is going to think that Elohim, that the spirit of dead Samuel is sovereign or is omnipotent or omnipresent. No Israelite is going to think that. And so they weren't thinking of specific set of attributes whenever they used the word Elohim. They weren't thinking that. And so this is actually where the heresy will come. If you're thinking of Elohim as a specific set of unique attributes, biblical writers never use the word that way. Right? So again, here, attributes such as omnipotence, omnipresent, omniscient, sovereignty, creatorship, they never use the word Elohim in that way. Right? So here we go. This is also why it creeps many people out. And for me, I did. It just sounds so strange when you say gods because again, according to tradition, church tradition, there's literally only one Elohim. Right? There's only one Elohim. So again, the Hebrew text is very clear. There are many Elohim. Biblical writers never use the word Elohim in this way to refer to some specific set of attributes. Because if they did, all those other Elohim would have those attributes as well. Right? And that's why it creeps many people out whenever you put the letter S at the end of the word God. I mean, for me, I did. Right? So that's not usually the case. So let's rethink of what Elohim actually means. So what is an Elohim? What actually is it? Right? What actually is it? So an Elohim, all right. If you go back, actually, you know what? Let's go back. Go back right here. Let's go back to the list right here. If you ask the question, if we ask, what do all of these beings have in common? What you'll see is that all of these instances, all of these beings, they all share the same residence. They are all part of the disembodied spiritual world. That's what they all have in common. The God of the Bible is a spiritual being, he's a supernatural being. The gods of the nations are supernatural beings. Demons are disembodied supernatural beings. The members of God's divine council, they're in the skies, all right? They're supernatural, they are disembodied, the deceased Samuel, and even the angels. Right? So that's what they all have in common. Again, what is an Elohim? So Elohim is a word that you would use to describe any member of the disembodied spiritual world. That's all it is, right? The word has nothing to do with a specific set of unique attributes. And to put it very, very simple, all an Elohim means is a spirit being. That's all it is, right? So it's used to describe any member of the disembodied spiritual world. Think of it also as a categorical term, a category. Um, the demons, the members of God's divine council, um, and yeah, the God of the Bible definitely. Um, they belong to the disembodied spiritual world. That's the term of residence. That's their place of residence, right? Elohim. Um, yeah, so it's Elohim, right? So to give another example, because remember the word Elohim is used for the gods and nations as well. Um, you have the Elohim of Moab, which is Chemosh, the Elohim of Sidon, which is I think it was Ashtoreth, yeah. So you have the Elohim of this, you have the Elohim of that, you have the Elohim of this, Elohim of that. So it's a categorical term, right? Right? It's a word that you would use to describe a disembodied being, disembodied spiritual being. That's what it is. It's kind of like the term mum, mother, mum, right? If I say my mum is beautiful, like I know who I'm referring to. If you say, like, I'm gonna pretend that I'm you, all right? My mom is also beautiful. I know whom you're referring to. It's not my mom, but it is your mom. But we're both using the exact word, mom, right? So it's a word that you would use to describe any member of the disembodied spiritual world, and it is a categorical term, right? So it's a generic word that you would use to describe a supernatural being, a spirit being. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with a specific set of unique attributes. Because again, if it referred to a specific set of attributes, then all of those other Elohim would have the same attributes. Again, no Israelite is going to think that the spirit of their dead uncle is in the same ontological level as the God of Israel. They're not going to say that. They're not going to think that. So that this is all what an Elohim is. So what did an ancient biblical writer, ancient Israelite believe? To sum up all of this, right, to put it in one single, statement or whatever, this is what an ancient Israelite believed. Yahweh is an Elohim, right? There are many Elohim. However, no other Elohim is Yahweh. All right? Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. He is species unique. Now, this is where the Israelite monotheism belief is going to come out now. That no other Elohim is Yahweh. There's only one Elohim that is unique. Right? Yahweh is species unique. There's only one Elohim that possesses the attributes of omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, sovereignty, creatorship. There's only one Elohim that possesses that. Right? In fact, biblical writers deny those attributes to the other Elohim. So this is what they believe: Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. He is species unique. That's all. That's what they believe. That's what it is. Now, this is where it will get interesting. now, now we've been saying that there are multiple Elohim, multiple gods, right? And so the initial response, or the initial what you automatically think is that, am I teaching polytheism? Does the Bible teach polytheism? Because we affirm that there are many other, there are many Elohim, right? Well, it's not usually the case. While the Bible affirms the existence of other gods, Elohim, right? This is not to say that the Bible teaches polytheism. And then this is one of the points that we want to make. The Bible does not teach absolute monotheism. And this is probably what most Christians are more familiar with. This is the view of particularly majority of Christians today. This is the view of monotheism that they have. Absolute monotheism, that there's literally one God that exists only. Right? There's only literally one God, literally one God that exists. Right? So while the Bible affirms the existence of other Elohim, this does not mean polytheism. Again, we need to sort of rethink of what an ancient Israelite or what the biblical writer is thinking, right? And what does an actual biblical writer think about monotheism, right? So the Bible does not teach absolute monotheism. This is what a lot of modern Christians view. This is the view that they have of monotheism, right? So yeah, we may need to rethink of what we actually mean by monotheism. So there are these are just some of the um, different views. So you have monotheism, and of course you have polytheism, and then to introduce you some new words, henotheism and monolatry. And basically, henotheism and henotheism and polytheism, they're both related. Henotheism is just a different form of polytheism, where it affirms um, the existence and the reality of other gods, and that you're only meant to worship one, right? That sounds kind of like what I've been talking about. Not really, not the case, because henotheism assumes that the one God that you worship can change, that you can switch, worshiping another deity. And that's why henotheism and polytheism are sort of related. So it's a form of polytheism. Now, monolatry on the other hand, Israel was definitely monolatrous. However, it's sort of incomplete. While monolatry affirms the existence of other Elohim and the reality of other Elohim and the exclusive worship of one God, Yahweh, it doesn't say anything about the uniqueness of the God that they worship. Right. So it's sort of an incomplete. While it's a close description of the identity of the Israelites, but it's incomplete. So they affirm the exclusive worship of one God, the reality of other Elohim, but it doesn't say anything about the uniqueness of the God that they worship. That's monolatry, right? So that's what it is. And what's interesting as well is that the word monotheism, so it's a term coined in the 17th century, but when it was coined as an antonym for atheism and not polytheism, right? So in this case, if we have that in mind, monotheism is the belief that there is a God. There is a God. Not someone who believes that there is only one spiritual entity that exists as God, as God, which is the view that we're all familiar of, the view that we traditionally hold to, which is absolute monotheism, that there's literally only one God that exists, right? So it was coined as an antonym for atheism. So notice how the word monotheism, it doesn't say anything about whether it denies the existence of other gods. It literally just means the belief in one God. It doesn't say anything about the reality or the denial of other gods. It just says belief in one God. That's it. That's what it is. All right. And also, what's interesting is that all throughout Scripture, The biblical text says that Yahweh is the God of gods. All throughout Scripture, Yahweh is said to be the God of gods. Now, again, um, a lot of people are going to say that these other gods are not really real. They're just a figment of our imaginations. Well, my challenge is then what do we do with verses like these, where the biblical writer is constantly saying that Yahweh is the God of gods? Let's just look at some of these verses. Let's go to Psalm 136, verse 2. Psalm 136, verse 2. It says right here, give thanks to the God of gods, for his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of Lords. Let's just read the next verse. Give thanks to the Lord of Lords, for his steadfast love endures forever. So he's called the God of gods, right? God of gods. Let's go to Deuteronomy 10:17. Right? Here it says, for the Lord your God, remember all capitals, that's the divine name. For the Lord your God, for Yahweh your God, is the God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God who is not partial and takes no bribe. Notice how the biblical writer is sort of assigning attributes, describing him, right? Yeah, awesome God, the great, the mighty. They're sort of applying attributes to Yahweh, their God, right? So, God of gods, again. Let's go to Psalm 95, verse 3. Let's go to Psalm 95, verse 3. Here it says, for Yahweh, for the Lord, is a great God and a great King above all gods. That's interesting, right? King above all gods. Let's go to another one. Go to Psalm 86. Psalm 86, verse 8. There is none like you among the gods, Elohim, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. And there's none like Yahweh among the gods, among the Elohim. All right. Let's go to Exodus 15:11. This is after they cross the Red Sea. There's the Israelites. This is the song of whose song? Yeah, Moses, the song of Moses. All right, let's go to verse 11. Where is it? Right here. Who is like you, O Lord, O Yahweh, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? Notice how they're applying attributes to Yahweh, the God of Israel, right? So they deny these attributes to the other Elohim. Because look, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? No one is like him. Because Yahweh is species unique. Because remember, Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh, right? No other Elohim is Yahweh. So let's go back to the slides. Oops. All right, let's go back to the slides. So again, Yahweh is said to be, right? The God of Israel is said to be the God of gods. All right, he's said to be the God of gods. Now, what I would say is that the biblical text assumes or clearly states that these gods are real. They are real spirit beings, right? These are real spirit beings. Now, because what many people will do is say, well, these gods aren't really real. Well, if these gods are not real, now how does this glorify God in any way? Let's just say God of gods, right? Yahweh is the God of gods. Well, if those gods aren't real, it's kind of like you're saying Yahweh is the God of things that don't exist. that doesn't exalt him or glorify him in any way. It doesn't uplift him. It doesn't exalt him. You're comparing God to something that doesn't even exist. It's not even real. How does that glorify him in any way? Why not just say that God is the God of unicorns? Or that God is the God of the DC universe, or God is the God of the Avengers. God is the God of Superman. God is the God of Spider-Man. You know, these beings, these things are not real. In fact, us Christians, all of us, we are better than Superman. We're better than Spider-Man or Captain America, because at least we exist. They're not, right? So again, when the biblical text says that Yahweh is the God of gods, the text means exactly what it says, right? The gods are real. But then again, we think, oh, that's polytheism. That's polytheism. And what I would suggest is that we may need to rethink of what a biblical writer means by monotheism, right? So again, Yahweh is the God of gods. The gods are real. Yahweh is an Elohim. No other Elohim is like Yahweh. He is species unique, right? He's species unique. Now let's go to some questions right here. Now, the questions that you inevitably get when it comes to this, some people will ask, well, what about those verses that say that there is none besides me, or there is none like me? They will use this phrase as a justification that the other gods are not really real. They're just a figment of our imagination. Right? So what do we do with these phrases? Well, these are not statements of denial, the existence of other Elohim. Because again, we've already looked at verses that affirm the existence of other Elohim. And of course, the Bible cannot contradict itself. And yeah, we've just taken a look at the Yahweh is the God of gods. If those gods are not really real, then how does that glorify him in any way? You're comparing God to something that doesn't even exist, right? So the Bible cannot contradict itself. We have already looked at verses that affirm the reality of other Elohim. So these are not statements of denial, okay, of the existence of other Elohim. Okay, we've taken a look at Deuteronomy. Well, actually, we won't take a look at these, but on the left side, Deuteronomy 4, Deuteronomy 17, Deuteronomy 29, Deuteronomy 32:17. We just, we've taken a look at Deuteronomy 32:17 already. The Shadim, the demons, are also called Elohim. If you take a look at, if you take a tour over Deuteronomy, you will see the reality of other Elohim. Their existence is affirmed. All right, and then you have one of these verses that'll say, besides him there is no God. Deuteronomy 4:35. So what do you make of this? Right. So again, this is the point that I want to make. These are not statements of denial, but rather they are statements of incomparability. They're statements of incomparability. They're not statements of denial. And a good way to illustrate that, a good test case for that, is if you go to Isaiah 47, verse 8. Let's go to the biblical text. If you go to Isaiah 47, verse 8. Isaiah 47, verse 8. Right here. Isaiah 47, verse 8 says this: Now therefore, hear this, you lover of pleasures, who sit securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. This is Babylon saying, there is none besides me. All right, there is none besides me. Just hold that thought for a moment. Let's go to Zephaniah 2:15. Go to Zephaniah 2:15. In Zephaniah 2:15, all right, it's another city. All right, it's Nineveh. In Zephaniah 2:15, and here it says, "This is the exalted city that lives securely, that said in her heart, I am, and there is no one else." Right? In Isaiah 47, verse 8, you have Babylon saying, "There is none besides me." And in the book of Zephaniah, in here, you have Nineveh saying, "I am, and there is no one else." Now, if you're thinking of denial, you have to ask the question, is Babylon saying, "I'm the only city on the planet"? You know, all the other cities, they're not really real. Or or is Zephaniah, sorry, is Nineveh saying Babylon doesn't exist? Or I'm the only city that is real? They're just a figment of our imagination. No, what that is saying is that we're the best. We're incomparable. We're the most superior city on the face of the earth. There is no other city like us. Babylon is so great. There is no other city like us. It's not saying we're the only city that exists. If you go out of Babylon, you go, you walk a couple of miles, you walk about 6 blocks out, you ran into another city. So when it says there is none besides me, they're not saying they're the only city that exists on the planet, but rather it's saying they're incomparable. Babylon is incomparable to any other city that exists, right? So, so let's go back to the slides again. So these are statements of incomparability. When it says that Yahweh, when God says there is none besides me, He's saying that He is unique. Among the other Elohim, we just looked at some other verses. Who is like you among the Elohim? There's no one. Yahweh is species unique. Remember, Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Right? No other Elohim is like him. The same way Babylon and Nineveh says to themselves, there is none besides me. They're the most superior city. That's what they're saying. They're not saying there's no other city that's real. They're not saying that. And again, are Nineveh and Babylon denying the existence of each other? Makes no sense if they are. So again, these are not statements of denial, but they are statements of incomparability. That's all it is. Now, now this is a common view. Now you'll understand why I had to record this session is because a lot of Christians will use the word Elohim as a justification that God is triune. I mean, I did, and a lot of Christians still do today. So, does the word Elohim show that God is triune by nature? Now, you'll see the reasoning behind this, and probably you're familiar. Well, because they'll say the word Elohim is plural, right? The word Elohim is plural because of the im predication, Elohim. And they will say, well, in the Hebrew, if you have the word im at the end, that indicates plurality. Well, Elohim, and isn't the God of the Bible Elohim? Therefore, God is plural. There you go, he's triune. Well, the question that we want to ask is, well, plural in what? Plural in what? And usually what they assume is plural in personhood. Because remember, the standard formulation of the doctrine of the Trinity is God is one being and three in persons. God is plural in personhood. And so that is what they assume you know, whenever they argue that the word Elohim, um, whenever they use the word Elohim, right? Plural in what? And they assume that it's personhood. Well, assuming that it is personhood, okay, if you're thinking of personhood, if that is the case, can you also apply that to the other Elohim? Right? So remember, the gods of the nations are also Elohim. The members of God's divine council are also Elohim. The demons are also called Elohim. The spirit of dead Samuel is also called an Elohim. Well, can you apply the attribute of personhood to those other Elohim? Is the spirit of dead Samuel plural in personhood, right? So yeah, here again, are demons also plural in personhood? And this goes back to our point again, that the word Elohim has nothing to do with attributes. It has none. Because if it did, then all those other Elohim would also have those attributes, right? So again, yeah, this is exactly what they're thinking. Oh, Elohim. Well, the God of the Bible is Elohim, right? Well, the word Elohim is plural, therefore God is plural. And then they assume plural in personhood. They're thinking of attributes. And again, the word Elohim has nothing to do with attributes, because if it did, those those attributes, the other Elohim was also going to possess them. So again, you can't use this argument. For me, this is how I used to argue for the Trinity, and I think I'm convinced that you can't. You can't use this word as an argument that God is triune by nature. I think it's just incoherent. So, in summary, this is the end. This is almost the end of this video. In summary of this one, monotheism and Elohim, for this first session of the series. So, monotheism is the belief in one God while not denying the existence of other Elohim. Right. So that's what monotheism is. It's the belief in one God while not denying the existence of other Elohim, where biblical writers also apply certain attributes that they deny to the other Elohim, to the other gods. That's what monotheism is. That's what Israelite monotheism is. Right. Now, secondly, Elohim is just a term that you would use to describe a member of the disembodied spiritual world. If something belongs in the spiritual world, in the supernatural spiritual world, it's an Elohim. And if something is disembodied by nature, it's an Elohim. Now, again, this will sort of freak out people because, again, we're taught to think that the word Elohim refers to attributes, right? So that's all an Elohim means. If something belongs in the spiritual world, it's an Elohim. And we've also pointed out that Yahweh is an Elohim, and that no other Elohim is Yahweh. Yahweh is superior to all other Elohim. He is the Elohim of Elohim. He is species unique. That's who Yahweh is. And that's exactly what you see in the biblical text. And that's why the biblical writers would say, who is like you among the gods, among the Elohim, right? This is what an ancient Israelite believed. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. He is species unique. That's what they believed. And this is the main reason why I had to talk about Elohim first, why we had to talk about this, the idea of monotheism and Elohim, is because a lot of Christians will use the word Elohim as a justification that God is triune, right? They're using the word Elohim as an invalid argument to justify the claim that God is plural in nature, the Trinity. For the word is not tied with a specific set of attributes. The word itself has nothing to do with attributes. It has nothing to do with personhood. The word Elohim is a categorical term. That's what it is, right? That's all it means. It's a spirit being, a disembodied spiritual being. All right, so this is the end of the first session, and I hope that was helpful. In the next video, we're going to be talking about the uniqueness of this one God that we worship. So I hope that was helpful. This is the end of the video. Monotheism and Elohim.